Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Good morning from Sridham Mayapur.
Hari Hari
So we're reading from Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam, the king of all literatures. We have a very special discussion today. We're reading from the third canto, chapter 29, which is the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev about devotion and bhakti. And today we're reading from text number 10, which we spoke on a few days ago, and there was a lot of technical things. I'm going to review a little bit of that again today, just to try to catch everybody up. It's a very subtle topic. Text number 10. Karma nirhadam udishya parasmin vatad arpanam yajed yastavyam iti va pritad bhava sa satvika. When a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities of fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. So we read the entire purport the other day. We have a lot of things we want to try to cover today. I'm just going to read the first paragraph today. Srila Prabhupada describes the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, along with the Brahmacharis, Grihastas, Vanaprasthas, and Sannyasis, are the members of the 8 divisions of Varnas and Ashrams, and they have their respective duties to perform for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of God. When such activities are performed and results are offered to the Supreme Lord, they are called Karma Arpana, duties performed for the satisfaction of the Lord. If there's any inebriety or fault, it is atoned for by this offering process. But if this offering process is in the mode of goodness rather than in pure devotion, then the interest is different. The 4 ashrams and the 4 varnas act for some benefit in accordance with their personal interests. Therefore, such activities are in the mode of goodness. They cannot be counted in the category of pure devotion. Pure devotional service, as described by Rupa Goswami, is free from all material desires. And ya vilasita shunya. There can be no excuse for personal or material interest. Devotional activities should be transcendental to fruitive activities and empiric philosophical speculation. Pure devotional service is transcendental to all material qualities. Gora draganya gana gota goloruharam Goranga Guratama Gopyara Kopa Vriksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshika Vadam Satatam Namam Panchakopa Vidisha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavam Vaishnava Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. So, this is a very subtle topic. Today we'd like to speak something about Bhakti and the mode of goodness and how it's still mundane. And in this connection, we'd like to speak something of a story from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and focus on the purport of that. It's a long story and it's something that we've given seminars on for 1 week. Today we're going to try to pack it into one session, and that is the story of the Yajna Brahmins and their wives. So in this verse, Lord Kapila Dev uses a phrase, pritag bhava, which is an important phrase. It's confusing sometimes even for devotees meaning people in our movement, to understand the difference between what we call sagun bhakti, or bhakti which is under the modes of material nature, and nirgun bhakti, or bhakti which is free from the modes of material nature. Now, the Rajarsic, passionate bhakti, and the tamasic bhakti, that may not be so difficult to understand. But when we speak about the sattvika bhakti, or bhakti that appears to be in the mode of goodness, which Jiva Goswami says that bhakti is never under the modes of material nature, but it appears to be sometimes. Bhakti Devi allows herself to appear like that for certain types of people. So the word pritag bhava, as we were speaking in the last few sessions, is significant in this verse and also in the previous verse. It means someone who is a separatist, someone who desires something other than the Lord. Now, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points us in a direction in this discussion on text number 8 in this chapter, which speaks about Bhakti and the mode of ignorance. He gives a verse from the Brihanaradiya Purana, first canto, chapter 15, which is spoken by Dharmaraj, or Yamaraj to King Bhagirati. And he spoke there about 3 different types of tamasic bhakti. And he said one can look there to see the natures of the Rajarsic and Sattvic bhakti also. So we've done that. And we spoke something about that in our last session. I won't go over the Sanskrit again, but I'd like to just touch on the meanings, which are very subtle and very deep. To quote something we like to refer to quite often, Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Krishna Samhita, when he speaks about Dhenukasur, who is a person who's, Bhaktivinoda says, is like an ass, like a donkey. And as Bhaktivinoda says, he thinks that just engaging in following the 4 regulated principles is dharma. And he becomes angry when he sees people who can climb the tall trees and he can't. He starts making a loud noise. So although it looks like Dhanuka is following dharma, he's actually just a big noisemaker, something like Keshi we were speaking about recently. And Bhaktivinoda, in that section, he says there that subtle discrimination is extremely important for bhakti. It's extremely important. We see so many times devotees have disagreements about things. And if you really analyze it, in one sense, they may both be correct. But because they're speaking from a subtle perspective in one way, then they're disagreeing about that. So in the Brihanaradiya Purana, Dharmaraj tells King Bhagirati also about 3 types of sattvika bhaktas, or devotees in the mode of goodness. He says that there's someone who's sakrita papanam, whose desire, he's worshiping the Lord, although he has shraddha, he says, he has faith, but he's worshiping the Lord to destroy his sins. And he's said to be the adama sattvika bhakti, or the lowest of all the different bhaktis in the mode of goodness. And we spoke something about a verse from the 10th chapter of the 7th canto where Prahlad prays the Lord in Sringati, Yadida Shasi Me Kama, please take away my material desires. But we shouldn't confuse that and think, oh, we shouldn't ask for removal of material desires, that's wrong, it's Maya. No, we should do it in the right mood. And when Prahlad Maharaj prays the Lord in Sringati, please take away my material desires, it's not for his own pleasure, it's not for his own self, but because he wants to be a better instrument, a better servant of the Lord. And Srila Prabhupada makes that clear in his purport to that verse. We spoke about that in our last session, and we'll go back there again. So that's the Agama Sattvika Bhakti. He's someone who is worshiping the Lord. That's a very wonderful thing. And he has faith in the Lord, but his purpose is to become free from material desires. It's pretty good, but it's still Saguna Bhakti. It's still Bhakti under the modes of material nature. So then, Yamaraj speaks about the Madhyam Sattvic Bhakta, and he says that this devotee is someone who's thinking, Haridam Priyamiti, this is pleasing to Lord Hari, to Krishna. And with that idea, he's serving the Lord, and he's doing it with faith. He's a Madhyam Sattvika Bhakta. Now this may sound very startling, because Rupa Goswami, in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, one verse which many Vaishnavas consider to be the Mula Shloka, the most important verse in the entire Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anyabhilasita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anabhitam Anukuyena Krishna Shilam Bhakti Uttam. He speaks what is Uttam Bhakti, what is pure Bhakti, and he says it's that Bhakti which is Anukuyena Krishna, done for the pleasure of Krishna. But here, the Brihanardiya Purana is describing that this is someone who's a Madhyam Sattvik Bhakta, who's worshiping the Lord for the Lord's pleasure. How is that Sadguna Bhakti? Now, what is the difference between what Rupa Goswami is describing and what Yamaraj is describing in the Nardiya Purana to Maharaj Bhagavad? So we have to see the motivation, because the motivation is everything. And in our last session, we spoke about how sometimes they may be a con artist, and they're trying to cheat someone out of a large amount of money. And so they do something which is generally speaking in the mode of goodness. They try to understand another person. It's very hard to understand another person in this world. Even we see in marriages, the husband's not interested in trying to understand the wife, or vice versa. Or the friend is not interested in understanding the friend, or the politicians are definitely not interested in understanding the people, just only they want their vote. But to consider someone's pleasure is a very high thing. To consider the pleasure of the Lord is a very, very high thing. And especially this person also is described as Shraddhaya Samyuto. He also has faith in Bhakti. But his Bhakti is Sattviki Madhyama tu Sa. It's a Madhyam Sattvik Bhakti because he's still Pritag Bhava. He has some separate desire. He's trying to meditate on the desire of the Lord because he's heard, perhaps, some higher Vaishnavas say we should try to understand the mood of the Lord. And so then he's thinking, if I do this, then it's going to be good for me. And maybe I'll be able to practice Varnashram Dharma better, as Srila Prabhupada speaks about in the purport. Or maybe I'll be able to get liberation. So that's a Madhyam Sattvika Bhakta. Then there's the Uttam Sattvika Bhakta. And this person is described, Vidhi Bhujyacharedyastu. He has some knowledge of Shastra. And because of that knowledge in Shastra, Dasa Chitpitam Nripa. He wants to become a servant of the Lord, Das. Or as one person has translated this, a slave. Das also means a slave. He wants to serve the Lord. So that sounds very, very good, doesn't it? But still, if there's Pritag Bhav, if there's some separate desire from the Lord, if someone is becoming a servant because they want to please a sadhu. That's nirguna bhakti. That's bhakti separate from the modes of material nature. But if someone is becoming a servant of sadhu because I'm going to look really good, it'll be good for my career in society because Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj is so brilliant. And if I just tell everybody I'm his disciple and have his picture in my deed bag or something, then everyone's going to give me respect. Or I say I'm a disciple of Lord Govinda Maharaj or this or that. And it's nice. You want to be a disciple of that Mahatma. You want to become a servant. That's a very good thing. But if this Pritha Bhav is there, this separate attitude, I'm becoming a servant. Why? To please that person? Because that person owns me? Or I'm becoming a servant for some other subtle reason? And so such a person who becomes a servant based on Shastra, servant of the Lord, he's Uttam Sattvika Bhakti. He's the best of all the Sattvika Bhaktis. Okay, is this, everybody here understand these points now? Krishna Kram, is it clear? Kind of? Okay. So now I'd like to begin. Anapayani Radha asked a very good question in the last session, which left me a little blank for the moment. I hadn't really thought so deeply in these verses. And she asked about examples of personalities like this. So I would like to offer two examples of persons, and I would suggest that we not try to judge them as persons, but we look rather at their behavior, in the first case of Lord Brahma, what they're saying about themselves, and analyze that, rather than trying to say, oh, this particular person is a devotee who's like this or this. It's a subtle distinction again. So our first example is Lord Brahma. In the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, when Narad Muni comes to him and says, Dad, I've been looking for the best devotee in the universe, and it's you. You're the best devotee. And Lord Brahma shakes his hands and he says, Tam mayayaiva satatam jagatoham guru prabhu pitamahashta krishna shanavi padma samudbhava tapasya radikas tashyeti adya guru madarhata brahmanda vasya kapara vyapaharmasya vivala bhuta prayatna lokiya nasa chinta niyantita Sarva grasi mahi kala bito muktim padam grine. He says, because of Krishna's Maya, tan Maya yaiva satatam, I'm always in Maya, then Jagatoham Guru Prabhu, I always think I'm better than everybody else. I'm the guru, I'm the controller of everything. I'm Pitamaha, I'm the grandfather. Krishna Shanavi Padma, Samudbhava, I came from the navel of Krishna. I'm a pretty high-class personality. Tapasya, I'm a ascetic, Eradikas, I'm the great worshipper. I'm the great guru of the whole universe. And he says that actually, in reality, Sarva Grasi Maha Kala Bito. Bito means fear. Actually, I'm afraid of time. Although I have all these positions. My real situations, I'm afraid of time. And Muktam Padam Vrine. He says, I'm Mumukshu. Mumukshu means someone who desires liberation. Now, someone who's worshiping the Lord, like Lord Brahma, but they want liberation. That's not a very bad thing. We shouldn't criticize such a person. But that's Saguna Bhakti. And here Lord Brahma says, Mukti, Muktam Padam Vrine. That all that I really want is liberation. That's my real motivation of things. So I'd like to turn now to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's amazing purport on this verse, today's verse from the 29th chapter, third canto. And he speaks about the Sattvika Bhaktas. He says that the Sattvika Bhakta worships with the intention of destroying karma. And his goal in bhakti is that. He wants to get rid of his bad karma. And he's worshiping in such a way so that his actions are offered to the Lord. And he's doing hearing and chanting, he says, but it's filled with offering of occupational duties. As Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says in one lecture, he said that if I don't see my Gurudev constantly, then I'll start running after the needs of my body and start thinking my body is so important. And you see they have a huge medicine cabinet there. And they're going to so many doctors, I know. This is my position. And they have so many clothes, and they're always thinking about their personal body, their occupational duties, as Prabhupada speaks about in the first part of his purport we read today. They're thinking about Varnashram Dharma. He's worshiping, Vishnu says, out of duty, because he's obtained the rules for daily rites, and he's focused on these rituals and things. He's doing his duties of his ashram, thinking that his worship is similar. He's worshiping while he's doing his duties of the ashram, but he's thinking that his worship is similar to his execution of varnashram duties. He can't really see the difference. It's a very subtle thing. The Vaishnavas take bath in the Ganga, so do the Smarta Brahmins. The Smarta Brahmins chant the Hare Krishna mantra. In fact, in Jagannath Puri, in Orissa, it's traditional that when the Smartas get married, part of the ceremony is the bride gets initiated into the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. These are the Smarta Brahmins. They're not Vaishnavas, they're impersonalists. But they get initiated in the Hare Krishna Mahamantra because they have some faith in that. But they can't distinguish between these two things. So Vishwanath goes on. He has a desire for liberation, which is Prita Bhav. It's a separate thing. And he says the 9 types of bhakti, the 3 types of tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic bhakti, and so 3 of each, are successively superior. And sattvic bhakti produces some kind of knowledge. He says, but in this kind of bhakti, where Gyan is there, and Bhakti is also present, it's called Jnana Mishra Bhakti, which produces Shanti Rati. It gives some mood of awe and reverence for the Lord. He says, now, if that Gyan is secondary and the Bhakti is predominant, then it's Jnana Mishra Bhakti in Shanti Rati, and it's beyond the 3 gunas. He says, but if Gyan predominates and Bhakti is secondary, then Bhakti becomes like an anga of Gyan, then it produces Sayuja Mukti, or impersonal liberation. And he says that Bhakti mixed with karmic activities such as an Ashwamedha Yajna, horse sacrifice, with a desire for material gain, with some offering of the actions and attachment to the results, but not offering all the actions, produces Salokya liberation with happiness and powers. And if one performs bhakti and offers some karmas without desires for the results, then it produces Shankarati. This is a very technical thing. And he says, although Rajarsic and Tamasic bhakti produce results, the performers generally get material results. If we're doing bhakti in the mode of ignorance or bhakti in the mode of passion, the result is you will get a fantastic husband, or you should think so in the beginning. You will get a lot of money, you'll get a nice job, you'll get a nice degree, or whatever. And Vishwanath says the results will be greater than usual because of the power of bhakti. He says, however, in terms of yielding devotion, sometimes such bhakti will become pure if someone continues performing it, and especially if they have association with pure devotees. So in this regard, I'd like to turn now to another example of Satvika Bhakti, which is given in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam in chapter 23, in the story of the Yajna Brahmins. Very, very interesting story. It's a long pastime. I'm just going to touch on certain aspects of it, and we want to do it from the perspective of a number of different literatures that we've researched over the years. Very interesting thing. One day, Krishna and the boys were walking in the Vrindavan forest, and the boys became hungry, and they complained to Krishna. Well, this is the first thing we should think about, because everything has a deep purpose. How does these boys become hungry? Especially when we read in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that Maharaj Parikshit is described as he's a pure devotee, And pure devotees are described as they never become hungry. They never become thirsty. And when Maharaj Parikshit appeared to be thirsty, that was just by the will of the Lord to enact the pastime of his being cursed by the Brahmin boy, Shringi. So then what to speak of Maharaj Parikshit? The cowherd boys are hungry. On that day it said that their mothers didn't pack them a lunch. It's also an unusual thing. And on that day, Krishna had purposely taken them on a path where there was no fruit trees. And the boys began to complain about their hunger to Krishna. Why are they complaining? The boys are not hungry. The boys are hungry in another sense, not for themselves. They're hungry for Krishna. They're worried, oh Krishna, you must be hungry. But they think to themselves, if we tell Krishna we're hungry, or if we tell Krishna, oh, you must be hungry, Krishna will say, no, it's okay, I'm all right. But Krishna loves us so much that if we tell him we're hungry, then Krishna will definitely do something and it'll be for his benefit. So then Krishna told them that they should go to the village of the Yajna Brahmins. Now this pastime also has an intimate connection we're not going to discuss today, but it's a very interesting point. Sridhar Swami Bhavarta Deepika raises, it has an intimate connection with the Govardhan Lila. Because the place where the Indra Yajna was performed was that same village, and the Brahmins who performed it were the same Brahmins. It's another topic, but it has some interesting connection. So Krishna told the boys to go there, and he went there and he found all these Brahmins chanting so many different mantras. Swaha idam Vishnave idam namama. And they're offering worship to Yagyabhuk, the Lord who is the acceptor of sacrifice. And the Lord is personally present in the form of the fire. And they're wanting to please him. They're Vaishnavas, they're devotees. They know Shastra, they know so many rituals and ceremonies and things. And they're worshiping the Lord, they're feeding the Lord, they become servants of the Lord in that sense. But an amazing thing happens. All of a sudden, God comes and says, okay, here I am. Feed me. I'll accept what you have to say. And how does he do that? He comes in the form of Guru. The boys are the representative of Krishna's representatives. And they're coming and saying, okay, you guys have been doing all this sacrifice. We're here now. God is asking for the food that you're cooking. Krishna told them, you go there. They have so many different foodstuffs they're offering to the fire, and you ask them for charity. The Brahmins just ignored them. They wouldn't even look at them. The boys felt a little hurt. And the boys then, they spoke up. The 8th verse in this chapter describes, the 23rd chapter, 10th canto. Dikshaya pasusangstaya otramanyas chasattama anyata dikshitasyapi nanam asna hidushyati. They told those Brahmins, they addressed them, oh Sattama. Sattama means what? Persons in the mode of goodness. So the Brahmins are an example of someone in the mode of goodness. And they're doing sacrifices. And these boys are coming. Now you might think, like the Brahmins thought to themselves, they wouldn't even look at the boys. It's described in a wonderful book called Vrindavan Lilamrita by Nanda Kishore Goswami. He speaks about this pastime, and he says what the Brahmins were thinking to themselves at the time. Sahajera kalamati, kirikavani vane, kirahi kiva hoinchi. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. He says, who are these boys? Sahaji Rakal. They're just cowherd boys. We're Brahmins. We're better than them. And what are they doing? Just feeding bunny. They're roaming around in the forest. They don't know how to worship God. They're not high-class persons like us. They don't know how to speak properly. And those Brahmins spoke amongst themselves. Yagiramba Kori Mola Loya Vipagan Ishvara Bhojana Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama Yagiramba Kori. We're doing sacrifice, huh? Loya Vipragan along with all the other Brahmins. Ishvara Bhojana Lagi. We're feeding God. We don't feed cowboy boys. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, after we feed God, then the first thing we're going to do, we're going to feed the Brahmins. That's us. Very important. And then later on, we'll feed everybody else, these cowherd boys. So the Bhagavatam, 23rd chapter, 10th canto, text 8, the boys tell those Brahmins, Dikshaya Pasha Samstaya, Otaman Yashta Satama, O Satama, O persons in the mode of goodness, Anyata Dikshita Shyapi Nanam Ashnani Dushiti. Don't think that these boys are ignorant persons. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur comments in this verse, which describes, I'll read the translation, except, the boys are saying, except during the interval between the initiation of the performer of the sacrifice and the actual sacrifice of almost pure Brahmins, it's not contaminating for even the initiated to partake of food, at least in sacrifices other than the Shrotamani Yajna. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is pointing out his purport here, the boys are pointing, but don't think we're stupid, cowherd boys. They know more than these Yajna Brahmins. These are eternal associates of the Lord. They understand all these ceremonies and rituals and things. They understand the essence of it because they're Krishna's great devotees. So the boys came back to Krishna. They were very disappointed. And Krishna says, well, what can you do? That's what happens when you go out and beg, right? People sometimes refuse. He says, I'll tell you what. You go back and ask the wives of the Brahmins. And Jiva Goswami, in his commentary, he says that Krishna told them, don't tell them I'm hungry. You go and ask the wives of the Brahmins, but don't tell them that I'm hungry. And then in the 17th verse of the same chapter, the 23rd chapter, 10th canto, the boys, it said, Gascharayan sagopalai saramo duram agata babukshitasya tasyanam samugasya pradiyatam. That the boys, they went there to see those ladies, and the first thing that happened, they went there and they said, Balaram sent us. And when the ladies heard that Balaram had sent them, and Krishna had sent them, they said, Krishna and Balaram, they became stunned in ecstasy. And Jiva Goswami says that the boys were thinking, okay, we understand, the Brahmins, they were like puffed up, and they had some problem. And so they ignored us. But the ladies, why are they also ignoring us? And they were just standing there. And so finally they kind of cleared their voice, excuse me, and they spoke this verse. Gascharaya, Sagopalai. They said, by the way, Babikshata Krishna's hungry. Very interesting thing. In other words, they're directly disobeying what Krishna told them. How can they be good? Interesting question. It's a side point, but it's a very interesting question. They're not disobeying Krishna. Rather, because these boys are so intimate with the Lord, they understand the inner heart of Krishna. And they understand what medicine is required for those ladies at that time. And so they told them, actually, Krishna's hungry. Apparently, according to Apara Vichar, the apparent consideration, they disobeyed Krishna. But in Tattva Vichar, in the absolute consideration, they were behaving in a perfect way. And so they told those ladies, by the way, Krishna's really hungry. We should do something. And so then those ladies, they woke up, so to speak, and they started cursing themselves. What are we doing? We're such nonsense. Krishna's hungry. We haven't. And so then those ladies They gathered up their foodstuffs and they went running to Krishna. Now I'd like to sing you another little song. This is from a wonderful book. By the way, I didn't give a proper description of the last things we were singing. That book is by a devotee named Nandakishore Goswami, who was a disciple of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He was in charge of the Nityananda Vat in Vrindavan, just near to the Radha Damodar temple. And long, wonderful stories about him. His book, Vrindavan Nilamrita in Bengali, is a very beautiful book. Now I'd like to read you something from another book, another perspective on this pastime. This is from a devotee whose name was Dukhi Shamdas. He was a disciple of the famous Shamananda Prabhu, another great devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he wrote a book called Govinda Mangal. And in Govinda Mangal, he describes some details of his pastimes. That what happened when those ladies started to run to Krishna and Balaram and bring all the food to them, their husbands got in the way. And what did the husbands tell them? Viprapatni hoya tora, nari vikama, dara pase gele nano gile, Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama. He said, hey, what are you doing? You're Viprapatnis. You're our wives. You should be very proud to be married to such great husbands like us. Huh? No. If you go to this Rakha, this cowherd boy, what's going to happen to you? Rahidi Kula Dharma. You're going to lose your religion. Krishna, who's the source of all religion, they're running to him. These Brahmins are telling those ladies, don't go to him, you'll lose your religion. Rahibe Kula Dharma. In particular, they said you'll lose your Kula Dharma. Your position of being good wives is very, very important. So this is an example of what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Sarartha Darshani commentary on today's verse, main verse about Bhakti and the mode of goodness. This is an example of someone, they can't distinguish between Vanashram Dharma, which is Saguna Bhakti, and Nirguna Bhakti. Their wives are much, much more advanced than themselves. And they go on to tell their wives, Kulera Kamini Torah, Kina Jai Vani, Yajna Kare Deha Manjana, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Rama. Kulera Kamini, you are the wives of a good family. In other words, don't screw it up, okay? You're married in our family and you're going to give a bad name to our whole family because you're going to that Krishna in the forest. Instead of performing sacrifices, religious activities with us, you're going to do something irreligious. You're the wives of a good family. Kena Vaivani, why are you going to the forest? Yajna Karye Dehaman Chalaha Sari Chalaha, come. You have to come back and focus on your duties of helping us, being a good, what's the word, Dharma Patni, a good Dharma Patni, following your husband who's a very religious Brahmin, and doing his sacrifice for the pleasure of Vishnu, which is all according to Shastra. Okay? So this is Saguna Bhakti. It appears like Bhakti. The Brahmins are doing sacrifice for Yajna Bhuk, for the pleasure of God, for the pleasure of Vishnu, and they know Shastra. And they're following all the rules and regulations very properly. They're offering foodstuffs to the Lord. But when their wives become attracted to going to see Krishna, they become upset. Thakur Bhaktivinoda, in his Krishna Samhita, speaks about this in chapter 5, text 7. He says, Tesham striyas tada gatya Shri Krishna savidhim vane akurvanatma danam vai Krishnaya Paramatmane. That the wives, he says, these ass-like Brahmins, they're like asses. An ass is a creature which looks like a servant, but it's really just carrying a heavy load, and it's not really thinking why it's doing what it's doing. It's just carrying a heavy load. The wives of the ass-like Brahmins represent people who are subordinate to those with undeveloped faith. And we spoke a few days ago about when we began, on our last session, we had a technical discussion about different types of bhakti. And I mentioned at the beginning that bhakti by nature is natural. And it's not dependent upon all these technical terms and things. So then someone may say, well, what are we bothering with all this for? I'm just going to be natural to do. Bhakti is svabhaviki. It's a natural propensity to living entity. There is a reason. We can just chant Hare Krishna. We don't need to read the books. But who has sufficient faith in chanting Hare Krishna? Who has sufficient faith in the process of bhakti? Therefore, Shastra is there, and therefore we want to have Shastriya Shraddha, or faith in Shastra. The Shastras are very, very important thing. And so this section of the Bhagavatam is teaching us what is Nirguna Bhakti, what is pure Bhakti, as the next few verses will describe, and what is Saguna Bhakti, what is Bhakti in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance. So the wives of the Brahmins, those Vedic Brahmins, were like donkeys, like asses. They represent people who are subordinate to persons with undeveloped faith. And Bhaktivinoda says, being under the control of the sweetness of Krishna, who is a super soul, Krishnaya Paramatmane, they went to the forest and offered themselves to him. He says, those who have undeveloped faith are called mundane devotees. It's Saguna Bhakti. It's Bhakti within the three modes of material nature. And it's interesting, this happens many times throughout religious history. And a wonderful example is here. I find us that these wives of the Brahmins were more advanced than their husbands. So I'm going to stop there. Again, I didn't accomplish what I wanted to do. We're going to come back here again in our next session. Let me just read the verse again. Very wonderful verse. When a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from inebrities of fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. Okay, and that's Sadguna Bhakti, Bhakti in the modes of nature. It's not Nirguna Bhakti. So I'd like to stop there. We're later than I wanted to go. So nice to see Mahendra Prabhu and different devotees, Natalia, Hare Krishna. Does anybody have any reflections or comments here? Brajabanita? Oh, good. Lynn, nice to see you. Hare Krishna. Ramananda Gopal Prabhu, nice to see you. Hare Krishna. So one thing, make a little comment on this too, we should be very careful as devotees. We want to follow rules and regulations, but when those rules and regulations, we start doing it for the sake of the rules and regulations. This is what Vishwanath is speaking about in his purport. We can't distinguish between bhakti and our own particular duties. Then it becomes problematic. And even sometimes we argue about it, we fight about it. We say, oh, you're my wife, you have to be a dharma patni, you have to be like this and that, and you can't go to the temple. Sometimes even devotees tell their wives that you can't go to the temple, you can't do service. Your most important service is to cook and clean the house for your husband. That's not bhakti. That's not a proper understanding. As we see in the case of the Yajna Brahmins. So this is a very wonderful story. I'm going to continue this further on Sunday. But now if anybody has any reflections or comments, could you have something you want to come up here, please?
Thank you. It was a wonderful description you gave and examples. I was thinking about when the disciple acts under the order of the spiritual master. And direct order from the spiritual master. He might not be pure enough, he might not even have any motivation, hopefully. So he engages in devotional service. Just the fact that he's following the order directly from the spiritual master, wouldn't that make him, that kind of bhakti already be, disregarding the other things that maybe a soul desire may be there. But
it may look like it. And that's what's confusing. That's what's very confusing. That's why this is such an important topic. It's not enough just like for someone to be meditating always about the mission of Guru. I remember in Los Angeles when we were going out for book distribution, Sankirtan. There was one devotee I was going out with, and he was every day just meditating on the pleasure of his guru. I think, that seems very wonderful. But later, he left the practice of bhakti, and nobody knows where he's at today. So how is it that he left if he was such an elevated person? What is his motivation? Was he Pritag Bhav? Was his motivation for meditating on the pleasure of Guru something separate? Was it subtly tinged, perhaps in his case, I can't say, I don't know his heart, but perhaps it was tinged with a desire to be the number one Sankirtan devotee and to have a bigger result than everybody else. And he knew that you become empowered if you think about the pleasure of Guru. A similar example is there in the Mahabharata with Ekalavya. Ekalavya looks like a great devotee. He's worshipping Dronacharya. And perhaps he's even thinking of the pleasure of Dronacharya. Definitely is. When Dronacharya came and asked him for some Guru Dakshina, then he said, yes, what would you like? He said, I want your right thumb, cut it off. Yes, Gurudev, right away. And he gave that to him. So that's a very confusing story. And even today in India, many people think of Ekalavya as a great devotee because without hesitation he gave that thumb. But in actuality, he's Pritag Bhav. He has a separate motivation from Dronacharya, from his guru. He was doing that to become powerful himself. And he was doing it because he wanted to be a greater devotee than Arjuna. And because of that offensive desire, Dronacharya had him cut off his thumb so it wouldn't be a competition for Arjuna. And he's actually a rascal. He's not a great devotee. You have some other thought?
Which is, I was considering also another, when the monkeys in the Ramayana were assisting Lord Ramachandra, and these are very you can say subhuman beings, helping and assisting, doing some devotional service, came to me as also what that service was totally for the pleasure of the Lord. They were from the external point of view, in the low class, not even human, but they were acting on his behalf. So that kind of activity became beyond and beyond. So then another example that came to me also was that maybe you know this better. I heard last time, and I think Ramanujacharya had some disciples who with bad character, and he wanted to achieve some. I don't know if it's Ramanujacharya, but it's not in our books. And he had a mission to accomplish, I guess, temples to construct or things like that.
Still Mundane.
Yeah, and then they were doing all kinds of things. Every one of them was expert in stealing or doing this and that thing. But they acted on behalf of him. So in which category would that be? That they did?
So he's mentioning a story which is told by Jiva Goswami and Bhakti Sandarbha about one of the Alwars, one of the great devotees in South India, in Ramanuja Sampradaya. His name was Still Mundane Alwar, who built the temple in Sri Lanka. And he went there and he saw that the grounds were terrible, there was weeds growing everywhere, and people were leaving their shoes around the deity. And he became disturbed by that. So he went to ask money from some wealthy people, but they wouldn't give money. It happens sometimes. And so then he took amongst his disciples, he had 3 disciples, I don't recall them. One of them was Jala or something, but anyway, he had 3 disciples. One of them could walk on water, one of them could open a block, and one of them could defeat anyone. His name was Tarka something. One of them could defeat anyone in debate. And so with the power of those 3 disciples, he set about robbing different people. The one disciple could walk across the moat. There was a body of water around protecting the castle or something. He could walk across it. And the second one could open any door, so he could get in any safe. And his third one would argue, there's a fourth one. Anybody's shadow he stepped on, they couldn't move. So then they would use those powers to rob people. And they also, not just those disciples, but he also had a number of gundas, of different low-class persons. There's a nice verse, Jiva Goswami quotes from Kevin Purana. Remember that verse which I oftentimes quote? Dharma Vivara Krishna. That's not it. Yeah.
That Dharma becomes Dharma.
Yeah, I should know the verse, nice verse. Anyway, he says that those persons, mama nadrikta dharma pi, who neglect me, then their dharma, their so-called dharma, becomes pop. Whereas on the other hand, if someone's doing pop, doing sin, but they're doing it for me, then that so-called pop becomes dharma.
Mm-hmm.
So, very interesting thing. So, in this story, I don't know any description about the level of advancement of those disciples or the level of advancement of the Gundas who are following him, but according to the tradition there in Sri Lanka, when at one point those robbers, they approached Tirumanga Alwa and they said, look, we've been helping you rob so much and you promised you'd give us some of the booty, some of the money, so where's our payment? And then Tirumanga Alwa told him, he said, well, it's on an island in the middle of the Kaveri River. Here's a nice boat, you all get on the boat and you can go over there to the island and get your treasure. Okay, great, thank you very much. They all got on the boat had holes in it. And when they got halfway across the river, the boat sank and they all died. Tirumanga Alwa did that. Not only, it's very shocking, you think Islam scandals are bad, this is really bad. Not only did he rob all these people, but he also murdered these people who were helping him. Now again, there's two considerations. There's aparavichar, the apparent consideration, and there's tattvavichar, the absolute consideration. By the aparavichar, by the apparent consideration, this is horrible. For someone who's in the mode of goodness and can't distinguish between dharmic activities in the mode of goodness and bhakti, it seems terrible. But by tattva vichara, everything is fine. Because Tirumanga Alwar is actually he's a partial incarnation of the Lord. I don't remember what aspect he's a partial incarnation of the Lord. And by assisting him, and then by dying in the sacred river Kaveri, those thieves all got liberation. They got so much of benefit from them. Or perhaps they took up bhakti again in the next life. And as far as the disciples of Tirumanga Alwa, they were doing bhakti. They could understand this is for the pleasure of the Lord. So I hope that's some good.
This is almost
okay. Very nice comments.
You just mentioned about aparavichar and tattvavichar, absolute consideration, and so I think it's in the Bhagavad Gita or some other part who also mentions that one should not give this knowledge to the ignorant. I think it's in the Bhagavad Gita. And Srila Prabhupada makes, and then I thought, well, what is true in these books? It's the Bhagavad Gita. And it appears that the Lord directly is giving, do not distribute these books to the ignorance. Most of the people are ignorant. So, but then Prabhupada says, but the devotee of the Lord understand the inner desire of the Lord. So just something that you already mentioned, but that came to my mind as that actually Prabhupada also was acting on that, having that particular comment that you should not give this to the ignorant. And then I thought, yeah, perfect, that's true. It's directly from Krishna. Why are we doing this? And then Prabhupada mentions it. But the devotee of the Lord understand the inner desire of the Lord. It's like things goes.
That's a very interesting point. Krishna has some comment to this. You have an answer to that? Is there anyone say something?
I just wanted to mention that Gurudev, thank you, that Gurudev speaks about this, that we shouldn't give the devotee into a faithless, racist process, but the devotee's desire to have them is the higher dharma than the devotee. It's a higher activity than following that. And he speaks about this in connection with Mahaprabhu many times, that Krishna had a certain rule, but Mahaprabhu's desire to give prema to everybody over time.
That principle is there, but we should consider this very carefully. Because we see in the case of Srila Prabhupada himself, that for example, when Prabhupada came to Paris once, and the devotees arranged for a lecture for him, and they were doing kirtan, prasadam distribution, so many hippies there, and everybody was in ecstasy, and then the devotees carried, like 6 devotees carried this huge Vyasasana for Prabhupada. They put the Vyasasana down, and then the same people started shouting bad words at Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada asked his disciple, Yogeshwar Prabhu, what they were saying. And Yogeshwar Prabhu didn't want to tell him that the Prabhupada was saying some bad thing. And Prabhupada said, anyway, no lecture. So this seems to be directly contradictory to what you were just saying. That although Krishna says, don't speak to them, those persons who are not a paskaya, who are not, says the 18th chapter, not a paskaya, who are not, don't have any austerity, who are shradahina, who don't have faith, and you shouldn't speak this knowledge to them. And Prabhupada says in his purport that the devotees are more merciful. But then we see in this case that Prabhupada didn't do it. So, how do we understand this? Both things are there. We see that Srila Prabhupada in his lectures, when he was speaking to outside people, if he was speaking to Christians, he might speak a lot about vegetarianism. But when Srila Prabhupada was speaking to his disciples, even in the early days in 26 Second Avenue, Prabhupada was speaking about Vrindavan Leela. But he didn't speak about Vrindavan Leela when he was speaking to the Christians or to new people. So this is an example of this. We should be expert and understand who we're speaking to and what is appropriate and not appropriate. And if someone doesn't have a qualification, then we speak in a way to give them faith. And if they don't have any faith, even in what we're speaking, they're asharadan, vimuk, or prashinvati, they don't have faith in us, they're reluctant to hear from us, or they're just not listening, then we have to behave in such a way that they develop faith. And this is why we were always raised this way in book distribution in Los Angeles, that when you go out and sell books, you're not selling the book, you're selling yourself. You should be such a happy, blissful person. People see it, damn, I don't know what that book is about, but if it'll make me like you, I want that. And the devotees, they have to be detached from that. Okay, so many things. Anything else quickly from anybody?
I guess one of the qualities of Krishna is that he's expert of time, place, and circumstance. So the devotees just apply this quality, expert of time, place, and circumstance. Not everything is like a standard.
So he's just commenting that Krishna, one of his qualities is he's expert in terms of time, place, and circumstance, and also the devotees are too. That's a preacher. It's not just, otherwise we become like the Yajna Brahmins. And we know rituals, we know mantras, and we just go out and we just speak it like the wind. But we should understand the situation. We should understand the people who we're speaking to. What is their qualification? Okay, Anupani, do you have anything?
I have a question. Thank you so much for these examples which illustrated these types of bhakti in mood of goodness. And I was thinking about this example, for example, Ekalabya and this Yajna Brahmins. For example, in the case of Yajna Brahmins, so they finally understood their fault, that they're doing not they're supposed to do. But Ekalabya, he didn't understand this. And and I wanted to know, for example, what should we do in our case? For example, I'm practicing bhakti in the mood of goodness somehow or other, maybe madhyama or something, some other level. And for me to give up this platform, I have to see it first of all by the mercy of devotees, and I will give up it. Or I just have to continue service of my Guru Maharaj, and it's going to be overcome. So what is the way to overcome this level?
We read something from Srila Prabhupada. We were just speaking in a Monday class just recently. Let's see if we can find this very interesting thing. Prabhupada makes a point which I think addresses your question. And Prabhupada, in his commentary on the verse, Anartha Pasamam Saksha Bhakti Yoga Nirhokshaje, he describes there. Here it is. He says that this bhakti begins with hearing and chanting. He says, but revival of the dormant affection or love of God does not depend on the mechanical system of hearing and chanting, but it solely and wholly depends on the causeless mercy of the Lord. We spoke about this earlier. Now you understand the answer to your question. But some other persons are hearing it not. So it's, although this is the activities of bhakti, if we're doing them in a mechanical way, they're not necessarily probably indirectly saying it's not going to evoke love of God, but that the love of God is solely and wholly dependent on the causeless mercy of the Lord. And so we had a long discussion about this a few days ago. What does that causeless mercy mean? That means the devotees. And Jiva Goswami, in his commentary in the same verse, he says that the Lord's mercy is evoked when we do sadhana. But then Prabhupada is saying just the opposite here. That you may be doing sadhana, you may be hearing the chanting, but you don't really, not getting the proper result. So what does it mean? In his Bhakti Sundara, Jiva Goswami speaks about how mercy is given. He gives a very startling comment, which I'm just going to throw out. I'm going to give a skinny for it. It takes a lot to digest. He says that Krishna actually is not merciful. He defines mercy. Mercy is when someone's suffering touches your heart. He says, but suffering can't touch Krishna. Krishna is completely transcendental. He's Satchidananda. He's always blissful. There's no question of him becoming unhappy. But still, we understand Krishna is merciful. What is that mercy of Krishna? That's Krishna Kripa Srimurti Gurudev. Krishna manifests his mercy, Jiva Goswami says, through the devotees who understand the suffering of other people. So if we're just doing some mechanical hearing and chanting, that's in the mode of goodness, that's nice. If we keep doing that, we may be a madhyam satvika bhakta. If we're trying to understand the mood of Guru, and we're doing, and somehow we please Gurudev, we please the Vaishnavas by trying to understand them, even though our motivation in understanding them may not be pure. But still we're trying to understand them, and somehow we please them, then Chaito Dharmana Margin. Something happens in that process, our heart becomes more purified. And then we actually begin to understand what is the pleasure of Gurudev and Krishna. And we come to Nirguna Bhakti. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you for addressing it.
Good question. So this is a really wonderful topic. I encourage everybody to come next week because I really want to finish the story about the Yajna Brahmins. It's a really far story. So we'll stop there. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Samaveda Bhakti Binda ki jai, Vancha Kalpadari Vischa, Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha, Patitanam Pavani.